All right, phone is rolling. I'm going to start Facebook, and then I'm going to type the title. And if you want to get started, we can just, let's see.
I was going to go and get a ice cream at Dairy Queen.
Oh.
Of all the foolishness. No, I just felt like I wanted one.
A 2020 1025. Okay, we're live, and we're going to talk about.
This is going to be part one of our horror series. So.
Yeah, we're going to talk about sin, iniquity, and evil. The definitions of those, and then I guess some of the things that some people are doing. Involving themselves in it.
Yeah, we're going way back in time for to set up for this because most planets don't deal with the shit that we've had to deal with.
Right.
You know, no planet has gone through what we have.
Right. So we got to start from the beginning.
So we got to start from the beginning for the story to make sense and why we are here, where we are, and why all these horrific things are happening on the planet. So we probably should just get started.
All right. Welcome to P&K Q&A for October the 25th.
I'm Krow.
And I'm Peter.
And we are a little over a week away from a day of horror. There's going to be 2 days of horror in the same week. Oh, depending on which side you're rooting for. So, what we've decided to do is we're going to get a history lesson and why so many horrors do exist on this planet, and because not other planets go through what we are going through. The universe has a system for evolution. It's and a way of bringing the children of time and space into light and life, and they can do it in like 1 million years. They've got the system down so good that they can do it in 1 million years. So, and you know, and then these worlds go on to light and life and new challenges that we would never understand.
Yep.
But challenges nonetheless. But there's always if free will exists, there is always going to be evil. Because people are going to have the free will to choose what they want to believe, and this is why the Eternal Father is insistent that a belief in Him and a faith and trust is to be wholly voluntary. He doesn't want to. He's not going to beat you over the head for it. Evil does that, but the Father doesn't. You gotta, you know. He wants people to come to Him on their own terms, and figure it out.
Yeah, if you think about it, voluntary service is so more valuable and pleasant when you have people who are working for you and with you who want to be there.
And, you know, I was actually thinking the other night, it's like, why have I chosen the Father over other options that I do have as a free individual? And my conclusion is because I actually have more freedom with the Father. I'm actually, when I really sit down and think about it, I am actually free to do almost anything that I want
Okay. Yeah.
when it comes to the Father. Because even when I'm doing the Father's will, it's really up to me how I execute it.
Sure.
So I've got that freedom.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I've got that freedom. I, need to go to Africa to do missionary work. Okay, let's say it did happen. Okay, how I get to Africa is actually completely up to me. I can go to Africa via South America. The Father might push me along a little bit quicker, but if in my mind, if my intention is to get to Africa, then the Father's going to be patient with me while I do it via South America. And then once I get to Africa, then that's when the job begins. And say the job is delivering water to a village. How I do that is totally up to me. And which is pretty much only going to be limited by my imagination and the resources available. But how I do that job is totally up to me. The Father's not going to tell me every little detail of how it has to be done. It's just, this village needs water. I'll help you out whatever direction you decide to go. And boom, next thing you know, this village will be getting water. But I'm doing all the work, of course. But if I'm really clever, I'll make the work fun, and the job will get done. I think that's where most people fall flat on their face, is that they think that the job has to be done exactly this way or exactly that way.
Yeah.
And that's not necessary. Not when it comes to the Father. He wants you to do it your way.
Yeah, I remember one of the things from Life's Little Instruction Book. If you've heard of it, I don't know, but it says when just telling employees, instead of telling them how something should be done, tell them what needs to be done, and watch them surprise you with creative solutions.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And so that actually does relate back to our history lesson on evil. Because you got to understand that that beings can choose how they're going to do things, and this is why the Father is insistent that you do the will of the Father, because if you do not have in the front of your mind all the time, just like Jesus did, to do the will of the Father, then you can get strayed. You can go astray with your own clever ideas.
Right.
And Jesus was forever fighting against that. Is because so that's why he always was like waiting on the will of my Father. I thought he was like probably being over cautious, but hey, he had an important job, so I guess that probably was necessary.
I wonder if he knew. As I said, we're talking basically about the narrative from something called the Urantia book, and this thing is 2,000 pages long, and it's basically an outline of what it talks about. And I'm wondering if there was information that he had at that time that it's not mentioning, or what he was doing here is maybe even more important than the book is talking about, or that he told anybody about at that time.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I think that, and you can probably sense how important the mission was by the conversation between him and Emmanuel, his paradise brother. Because I can only imagine that Emmanuel would be the only one that would truly understand what he was about to do.
Okay.
Yeah, because I don't think that Gabriel quite understood it, and I don't think the other paradise entities that were there that are in Salvatron quite understood it. But I think Emmanuel quite understood exactly what he was embarking on. because that was quite a long conversation, longer than what the book shows. So, knowing that things have choices, then this is where we go way back in time. And about 200,000 years ago. And this is when the Luciferian rebellion took place. And I've meditated on this quite a bit because I just find it absolutely fascinating that a being that was born in the real, stood before his creator, could come to such false conclusions. It still blows my fucking mind. It's like watching that really smart person that you've known your whole life do that one dumb thing that ends up getting his head fucking taken off. Yeah. And it's just like, buddy, I thought you were smarter than that. And so basically, Lucifer, well, he spent a lot of time, like, Lucifer had convinced himself that God does not exist, is basically how that goes.
He's the first atheist in this universe.
Yes, essentially. And his conclusion was that the universe just is, and that the Michaels just so happen to be powerful enough beings that they could build these universes, but there really is no father figure God. Lucifer accepted that there was a God, but he didn't look at it as a father figure. He looked at it as more like this controller entity, or AI, computer that just ran things. That was his view of God. And he was able to convince other beings of this, Satan being one of them. Believe it or not, Satan was not completely on board with Lucifer at first. Lucifer had to convince him, and then finally, when Lucifer did convince him, Satan became, God was all in.
Yeah, I imagine this would be a fairly foreign concept to the people who ended up going with Lucifer later. It was like they hadn't really considered this before when he came to them with this idea.
No, and he was able to convince some of the seraphim and the cherubim, and but his biggest success was among the material children, the material daughters and the material sons, okay. And that's where his biggest success was. And the reason why he had such great success amongst those beings is because he promised them that they would be able to incarnate in the flesh on the worlds of time and space. And that's basically what they wanted, but they were basically waiting on Michael's approval, yeah, for that to happen. And of course, there was a lot of hoops that they had to jump through. You couldn't just land, you couldn't go to a world of time and space without some experience and without some training. Yeah. And so, but a lot of these children, material children, they didn't want to go through that process. They especially didn't want to go through the process of separating themselves into the sexes. Mm-hmm. You see, material children are born androgynous. They possess, or hermaphrodite. They possess both male and female parts, and the separation process, for whatever reason, has been described by some of the material children as being a horrific experience. It's a separation of themselves. Right. So it can be quite the experience for them, and some of them didn't want to do it, but yet they still wanted to go on these planets. But you have to qualify to get on a planet of time and space. So outside of that, they can only stay in the real, but all the fun is here. and they know it because this is where the party is. So basically, it's like, it's like, not being invited to the prom. And so they were always, there was always a certain percentage of those guys that were always going to be upset. And so Lucifer was able to bring a lot of them over to his camp.
Yeah, so Lucifer basically convinced a lot of other entities that he could give them a gold pass to the things they wanted to without so much effort on their parts as would have been otherwise required. Sounds familiar?
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. This is why, like, what's going on today reminds me so much of the Luciferian rebellion. It just blows my goddamn mind. I'm just like, holy fuck, I've seen this before. I've seen this. That's just all I keep thinking to myself. I've seen this before, and I've seen it in my visions in the Luciferian rebellion. The filibustering at that time. Oh my God, the filibustering. And this is how the entities on the other side, they fight, by the way. They filibuster the shit out of each other. And, and the first person to stop talking loses. So, and I can, but I've watched the filibustering, and it's not that the angels that were on the side of Michael stopped talking. They didn't stop talking because they had nothing left to say. They stopped talking because they were getting nowheres with these beings.
Yeah.
They were just, after they talked for like 100 or so years, they got frustrated.
Got nowhere,
They got nowheres. One, well, maybe not 100 or so, but one did filibust for like over 50 years.
Sure.
And he just was getting nowheres with these guys. It's like, seriously? I've told you everything. And they just wasn't getting anywhere. So finally he just had to stop talking.
Yeah, it didn't register.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what, I've dealt with this, I'm sure you have as well on Twitter. I talked to some, I'm in some atheist-theist discussion groups, and I've noticed actually a very, very similar things happening between some hardline atheists and also some evangelical Christians, let's say. It doesn't matter what I say to them, even how neutral or reasonable a thing, they won't put their ego in the back seat, I guess.
Yeah.
And I imagine this is kind of what was going on with the Lucifer rebellion. The good and reasonable people were basically wearing themselves out and getting nowhere with this other faction, the members of this other faction, who they simply weren't registering the truth.
Yeah, and then so when Lucifer made bold to take over the capital, immediately all the communication lines were cut to Jerusalem. And
by
Salvatore.
By the universe authorities up above them for just this purpose.
The landed dock fathers.
Yeah.
They cut the lines right away. And then, of course, what ended up happening, like you said, those of, normal mind, they ended up banding together. And so, there was no, like, fighting, because they can't kill each other. They do fight with swords in the real, but it's a game to them. Yeah. It's fun. Because they can't kill each other. I've watched them cut each other's arms off, and they just laugh and put it back on, because it's just fun.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you got through on that one. To them, it's just fun.
They're LARPing, live action role play is what they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah, you understand why LARPing is why it comes so naturally to us, is because our betters are doing it all the time. They love role playing. They love acting out some of the greatest battles that have happened in the worlds of time and space. They really love doing that shit. It's like, because it's like acting out your favorite TV character.
So they're doing World War II up there right now?
No, they
I
do.
mean,
They do the fun ones.
Yeah.
Not the horrific ones. And there are, there have been like wars that have been, and they'll like do the wars where there's dancing too. They love the ones where where there's dancing.
Okay.
They love the old African wars. Yes,
cool.
like that.
Mm.
So, anyways. So they can't kill each other. So that's so they're not fighting to the death. What ended up happening after everything was cut off from Jerusalem is the faction of the people that didn't want to rebel, and which accounted for another 2/3. Because remember, Lucifer, was it 2/3 that he took of the heavenly host, or just a third?
A third.
A third of the heavenly host.
It said something about a third of the stars were stricken from the heavens or something.
Yeah. So basically, a third of the population of Jerusalem citizens went with Lucifer. The other 2/3, well, they all gathered under the leadership of this other guy, and basically they did the only thing that they could do. They went on strike. They refused to work for Lucifer, and there was nothing Lucifer could do about it. I mean, he was pissed off. He was like, "You got to do it," and they were like, "What are you going to do? Shoot me?" Let's say there's no way for Lucifer to threaten them, to coerce them into doing anything.
This war, that they use the term war because that's what we understand for the massive conflict, but it was mostly a conflict of ideologies. There was no physical, no meaningful physical whatever.
They just
happening.
they just basically strike. They just refuse to do anything.
It's basically a political argument.
Yeah, they just refused to lift a finger to do anything in Saturnalia that didn't come from the Languedoc fathers. Mm-hmm. They would follow those orders, but they would do nothing for Lucifer.
They refused to follow Lucifer's orders.
Yeah, and so that just and then Lucifer made all the ones that, and this is the part that I found fucking hilarious. Lucifer promises them freedom, that they'll be able to go to these planets and blah blah, do this, blah blah, do that. And then after he took over Jerusalem, he turned around and he made them all swear allegiance to him. I laughed my fucking ass. Okay, now we just went from dumb to even dumber. Yeah. It's like, what the hell? I mean, that right there, I mean, even like, I think to myself, even if I was like kind of going on Lucifer's side, because you might have a point there, buddy, but I would immediately put the brakes on when it came to like swear allegiance to me, and then I'd just be like, are you fucking kidding?
Yeah, and then probably
I just left one
probably
bar.
didn't they? They
all
tried
did
to do that. They're like, okay, you know what? No, this isn't. you break your word. I know some of them.
Well, most of them did.
Adjudicated, but.
Well, some of them were. They just were like, you know what?
Yeah.
I don't want nothing to do with Lucifer, but I don't want nothing to do with you guys either.
Okay.
And they just kind of floated.
Hmm.
And but eventually they ended up siding with Lucifer in the end, because they needed the loosh. Because when you deny when you deny God's existence, God will deny your existence. And if God denies your existence, you do not exist.
Yes.
So there you are. I mean, yeah, sure. And that is why planets get adjudicated. Because if enough people on the planet deny God, then God's just like, well, that planet, then you're dead to me. Yeah. God's quite, harsh that way. It's like, then you're just dead to me. So like, was it Kevin, Mr. Terrific, or Mr. On Dragon's Den?
Oh, I don't know. I never.
Anyways, he does that on Dragon's Den when the people refuse his deal. He's like, you're dead to me. You're dead to me. Kevin Larry, I think, or something like that. Anyways, he's hilarious. So, anyways, so I know it's long and drawn out, but it's hidden somewheres. So Lucifer, promised these material children that they would have bodies. So some planets were chosen to where they could go to, and they only had 36 to choose from. The other planets refused to go along with him, so he only had 36 planets. That out of the 600 and some odd planets in Saturnalia, only 36 rebelled. Yeah, that tells you something right there, doesn't it? Yeah. So he had 36 planets, and he also, and he was holding the capital, but he only held the capital for a very, very short time, like less than 100 years. And then something was done about that.
Yeah.
And
100 years is nothing by cosmic standards, by the way.
Yeah, it's nothing.
It's like he had it for a day or something less.
A week.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so not very long, but long enough to cause problems. And so once that's it, once the Landadoc fathers took remedied that situation, and they put an emergency sovereign in place.
Yeah, they sent a council of their own people to rule this thing
in Jerusalem.
Yeah, they basically declared a state of emergency and sent their own people in to administer it.
Yeah, and Michael basically was like, "Oh, okay, just." Michael didn't do anything because it was already done. Yeah, and Michael has a tendency of not interfering with what his subordinates are doing. If they're doing a good job, why should he step in?
Oh yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, so basically they stepped in. Actually, I think they did contact Salvatron and asked for help. And Michael basically said that you are fully capable of dealing with this situation. And so they were like, oh, okay. So they dealt with it. And once they dealt with it, then Lucifer had to bail off the planet. And he went to one of the 36 worlds that rebelled. They don't say which one, but I get the impression that it was one of the planets that was further along in their evolutionary trail. Like they were at technology level. And so that, somehow I think it was probably a reptilian planet. So,
Okay.
And so Lucifer ended up going to that planet, and to make sure that, other planets stayed, within, his authority, he sent representatives to the other planets, one of them, and Satan being one of those people. Well, Satan ended up getting Urantia, and that was the planet that he ended up. Thus, the reason why we know this name, Satan. So he's sent to Urantia, and Caligassia is already the planetary prince. But when the rebellion broke out, there was quite some time where Caligassia didn't hear much about the rebellion, because communication lines were severed. So Caligassia took it upon himself to start ruling the Earth the way that he felt it should be done, and that ended up destroying Dalmatia, and also the 50 supermen that were part of his staff. Yeah. They ended up going. Most of them ended up going astray, but some of them did stay loyal. One of them being Van. Yeah. Van and his human companion. Norder, something like that. Nod, maybe Nod.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Again, this I know. Yeah, this happened at the time of. Well, this happened at the time of Adam and Eve were put into the middle of this at some point.
Yes, later on.
Later on. Okay. So we'll.
So Dalmatia was already in existence for 300,000 years before the rebellion broke out, and in that 300,000 years, not much progress is made because not much progress is expected. It's like because you're doing foundation work at this
basically
time.
what was happening, what was supposed to happen was the cosmic beings would start setting up schools to teach the evolved beings on the planet how to use fire and get food a little better, things like that. The rudiments of civilization and so on, things like that. And since this had never happened before on this planet, it was going to be a long process, like 500,000 years or so.
It was going to be
Several 100,000.
No, you're right. In 500,000 years, and that's just for the foundation work.
Yeah.
I mean, the foundation work is always
It
the
takes the
longest
longest.
and the hardest.
Because what happens is, if you're dealing with, say even like compounding interest or doing mathematical equations of certain types, they seem to be going along very slowly until at some point they start really going up. But that's not until the very end. When you get the final product, you have to lay all the groundwork and do it correctly to have reasonable success.
Yes, and here, just give you an idea how long and tedious it was. After 300,000 years of training humans, they were just getting to metalwork.
Yeah.
They haven't even touched machines. They're just getting to doing metal, smelting metal and making glass. That is where they had gotten to.
Or like copper Bronze Age type stuff, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's it. Copper and the softer metals.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly where they were.
Gold probably.
Maybe some gold, but not.
As far as tools.
They were looking at
brass,
tools, tool type material.
Yeah.
Gold was not a thing.
No.
It was never. It wasn't a thing until afterwards, and so 300,000 years just getting to smelting iron.
And,
So, and then all hell breaks loose, and when some of the staff that was on the planet when they decided to rebel against their creator, they decided to do things their way because they thought that they could do it a better way. They thought they could speed up the process of getting the children of time and space into light and life. Okay, that was still their goal, by the way.
okay.
Because Lucifer's philosophy was that we don't need God to bring the children of time and space to light and life. It will happen naturally and through mind. And so basically took God right out of the equation. And so that was the new philosophy that Lucifer relayed to the peoples of these 36 planets. And so a lot of them were like, yeah, okay, good. And so they were teachers, so they didn't stop teaching. So they kept on teaching, but when the humans at that time seen Dalmatia split up, half went this way and half went that way, it confused them very much.
Yeah.
And then they just stopped going to Dalmatia because they became frightened because the gods were fighting. And so they just, even though at Dalmatia they didn't proclaim themselves to be gods, but primitive man would have whispers. And it would have took some time, but eventually they would have came out of that. And this is why they can go through all the steps, right? To keep the children of time and space from overly worshiping them, because eventually they would have began to understood generation after generation after generation. And that would have started to come very quickly after, given another 200,000 years of like training and machinery, then by that time man would have came out of that infancy and wouldn't have worshipped them anymore, and then you would have seen the graph start to spike. And so and then in a very, very, very quickly you would start to see the children of time and space go into light and life. like I said, they've got such a good plan that they know how to do this within 1,000,000 years from when the thought adjuster shows up. Now, we were 500,000 years late getting our planetary prints because the thought adjusters had shown up 500,000 years earlier, but that's a completely different thing, and for different reasons why we had to wait. And so, anyways, so when Van seen rebellion breaking out, and before the lines of communication were cut off from this planet, he seen it coming. Like, he was seeing it coming a mile away because shit was already going on in Jerusalem, and and he was just like, what the fuck are these people doing? And so he already had a plan in place to seize the Tree of Life. And so when rebellion broke out, while everybody else was celebrating or choosing their side, Van had already chosen his side, so it wasn't even a question for him. And his human companion had chosen his side, and several other people along with them. And they immediately took possession of the Tree of Life and took it from Dalmatia. And they bailed, and they hid. And I asked the question, well, where did they go after that? They actually went north, straight north. And the reason why he went north is because he knew that the inhabitants of Dalmatia did not like cold very much. And to chase them up north would have slowed them down. But it didn't slow down Van and his human companion because his human companion was from there. He was a Nuddite. He was just, or an Andadite. Yeah, his human companion was an Andadite. So they came from the north anyway, so for them to go north was nothing. Because his human companion knew what animals to kill, knew how they needed to dress, knew everything that they needed to survive in the north. So that's where they headed. They headed north, and north and west into Tibet.
Because I was just thinking, what's north of that? Yes, it's Russia, China, Tibet. I wondered.
Yeah. Now, yeah, and that's where you end up getting all these secret schools in Tibet and all through the mountains, because Van and his human companion spent over 100,000 years in that, hiding in those mountains.
Yeah. Just a short aside, I watched Josh Gates' Expedition Unknown. Was it Search for Shangri-La? These sky caves in, not Tibet, though there probably are some in Tibet. Nepal, which is right up above.
Yeah.
These things, this mountain is like a conglomerate, very soft, so they riddled it with this city that you have to climb 200 feet up to get into.
Yeah.
So
that was Van and the other staff members that came with them and their human companions. That was all them. That's where they went. And it was the perfect hiding spot on the planet. Perfect hiding spot, because once you get into those mountains, you're not finding anybody.
Nope.
No, I mean, holy shit. I mean, I was in the Grand Canyon, and I mean, I just took one look from above and looked down, and I thought to myself, you turn around twice down there and you're screwed. You are completely screwed, and God only knows what the hell is down in there that wants you on its menu. So I was just like, wow. So yeah, you get into mountains, you're home free. Because, I mean, the enemy could be like right around the corner and not even know you're there.
Yep.
So that's where they went, and they were able to hide out in there for over 100,000 years. Van slowly made his way west, and across the north. And while coming across the north, he was also teaching spiritual things to all these people across the north. And they started their trek across the north, and then they came down, and then they came back into the Mediterranean. And they came that route because they didn't want to come all the way through India and everything, because that was just polluted with material sons and daughters, all with their own little demigod kingdoms. Like seriously, like they had all their little kingdoms and everything like that, and everything was great for them for quite a while actually, because they lost the tree of life, but they came up with a system, and a system of where they could make bodies for themselves. Okay, so and they would make these bodies for themselves. And these bodies would last a long time because they were fresh from Jerusalem. They knew how the technology worked. They knew how to build it on the planets of time and space. And so that's what they did. And they built all this technology for themselves. They had floating cities, for God's sakes. And it was just crazy.
Hence all the legend in Hinduism and stuff about that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and and you can see the remnants of them. Like I was down.
Well, Josh went and looked for the, said that Krishna built this floating city or whatever, and he went and looked on what island I forget now, but yeah, he went to look for the remnants of this thing.
And the remnants are almost unrecognizable,
Yeah.
but I recognized them when I was in Peru. I was taken to this site. And basically, it's all these great big huge boulders that have like different structures carved into them, but they're all like sideways, upside down, and they're just like smashed everywhere. It's like an atomic bomb went off. Like they were just like everything was exploded.
Okay.
And you see like pieces like they're just like tossed like hundreds of meters. And I was so they told me that this was the epicenter of the explosion, and I was like, okay. And it didn't look like an explosion to me. I know what an explosion looks like.
Oh dear. Hang on. The heck?
Oh, what happened there?
I'm not sure.
It's not hot, is it?
No, I don't think so. It says it's still rolling.
Oh, okay.
It's plugged in, but it somehow went on the screensaver. So, all right, we'll
Carry on.
continue.
Anyways, yeah. So, anyways, they told me that this was
Yeah,
an
while
explosion,
you're talking, I'm just going to double check my phone. Make
and
sure it's...
I couldn't.
Yep, no, that's good.
I couldn't figure out.
We're
It's
good.
like I've seen explosions, so I knew it wasn't an explosion. I've seen explosions, and plus, what really blew my mind is when we went for a walk down a trail, and we walked some ways, and I seen another remnant of what belonged to this other piece, and I'm just like, how did this get here? And they were like, oh, it got tossed from the because of the explosion. And I'm looking at this stone, and I'm thinking to myself, that's a big fucking stone. You know how much kinetic energy is necessary to toss that stone from there to here? I was like, it's more than what you can pack into a cannon. Because it was probably about maybe, I'm going to say 30 times heavier than a cannonball, cast iron cannonball. So there was a lot of weight. And I'm like, yeah, no. And then when I went back and I looked, I could picture this whole structure together and floating in the sky. And I was like, the only way this makes sense to me is if that big rock with all of those structures on it fell out of the fucking sky.
Yeah.
It's the only way it made any sense, is it had to fall out of the sky. And so, yeah, they had floating cities. And when you read in the Vedics, like you said, they talk about floating cities. So I'm just like, okay, this is one of the floating cities. And it's smashed to pieces in Cusco, Peru. And, yeah, so I was like, wow. I was like, okay. And you can see the stairwells, you can see the rooms. Like, it's all there. And it's just like, wow. And they were open concept cities. I don't think they believed in roofs. I think they liked looking at the stars a lot. So, anyways, so floating cities, they had the technology, and they were able to harness energy from the earth and they had themselves a good time here, a good life, 150,000 years. And they they had their wars. They fought against each other, but the wars didn't really begin to escalate until things started getting a little scarce, because they were using up so much energy from the planet, and the planet wasn't able to replenish itself. So basically, they were using the planet like they would in the real. On planets.
But it was like trying to use a battery instead of being able to plug into a like the wall. So
exactly, yes, and they were draining the battery.
And eventually, that's going to drain. Yeah.
Yeah, because they didn't allow it to replenish itself, and so they were not environmentally friendly at all.
No, I was just gonna say.
And so that caused problems with the Earth, and the Earth was much smaller back then too. So there was a less gravitational pull. So it didn't take as much effort for these cities to stay up as it would now, so because they had taken so much energy out of the planet, well, what happens when you drain a battery too quickly? It becomes hot and it can explode. Well, that's pretty much what the Earth did.
Huh.
And and like a battery, the chemical reaction was slow and then just pushed out and then stopped. At basically the size that we have here.
Okay.
That all happened in about a 300-year period. Because there's ancient stories that talk about watching the horizon move away. And so they're talking about the continents separating. That was a while ago. That pretty much happened about 52,000 years ago. That was the first catastrophe, and it happened because of that. And, well, what the hell?
Okay.
Well, he'll have to wait.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm not sure why I'm getting my screensaver here. I'm still rolling.
You're still.
And
Why don't
and the phone's rolling, so
and
I
the
got it on the
phone-
phone. Phone's
and
good.
my phone's ringing, but it's my son. He
Yeah,
called
no, go
twice.
ahead and take that, and I can.
You hold the fort?
I'll just hold the fort here. So what else have I got here to religion, things like that? Oh yeah, so coming up on the U.S. election, we were
What's going on?
talking about a message that we wanted to send, and situational awareness. Basically, you've heard Trump talk about fake news and so on. Well, there's tons of fake news, and I guess all I've got to say is the negative stuff is not as prevalent and not as true as the media wants you to believe. So trust your intuition, use your common sense, pay attention to what's going on, and just hang in there. So it's interesting what's going to happen. So that common sense. We were also talking about prayer, which what prayer is basically getting God to pay attention to you a little bit more frequently, more often. Telling basically it's a two-way street. God's taking care of you, but you can kind of help that out by telling him what you're doing, what's going on, and saying, you know what, I need a little help with this. There's an election coming up. There's some political issues. Could you help our local leaders make the decisions that are best for our city, best for our province, best for our country? The leaders and staff of other countries make the decisions that are best for the people of those countries, and so on like that. So that's things that are good to pray about, and prayer certainly does work. So that's something you can do, and just situational awareness. Pay attention to what's going on, and double check your sources, and watch out for that fake news.
That's the thing that I could never understand about evil. Everything that you do when you are evil has to be hidden.
Yeah.
Whereas everything that you do in light, generally you're proud.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, you're no problem. You're proud to do it. It's like, like bringing peace to the Middle East. You're like proud to do it. You want the whole world to know what you did, and you wanted them to know how you did it, so that they can do it too.
Right, absolutely.
So it's like, this is such a wonderful thing. Everybody needs to know how this is done, and everybody needs to try it at least once. And
so the thing with evil, then it's two things. You have to keep it hidden, and then you don't really, even kind of among the you
even
don't
amongst
tell,
themselves,
you don't tell other members
Evil
of the
people.
cabal what's going on, how you did something, or other, whatever thing. So it's this double hidden thing, which is I don't get it.
Evil consumes itself,
Yes.
which actually brings us back to our story. These material children, they consumed the earth. They basically consumed it, and it's no wonder we have so many horror stories about the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are the fallen. They are the material children that came to Earth, and they had bodies constructed for themselves. And so 52,000 years ago, the Earth finally had enough, and it let loose, tilted our axis 30 degrees, and you can actually follow the equator that they built on, and it is exactly at 30 degrees to our equator. So everything that's along the current equator was built after 50,000 years. So once that happened and all of their technology was destroyed, another 5,000 years had to pass or so before Adam and Eve could show up. So so time had to pass. So once that happened, so after the first catastrophe, that's when these all of these material children, by the way, that came to Earth at first, they were able to get here because Seraphim the Seraphim that rebelled had brought them here. But in the 150,000 years in between time, most of those Seraphim had perished. They had ceased to exist. And so there was no more transport off between planets anymore. And the Seraphim are really the only way to travel between planets. Yeah, you can do it in time and space, but you can't spend much time on a strange planet without having a proper vibration, because you will end up taking on the vibration of the planet, and that vibration may not be healthy for your particular physiology. But we'll get into that another time, how to move from planet to planet. So they're stuck on Urantia, and because they're stuck, and now resources are limited because the whole planet just got fucked, like big time. I mean, look at the structures and the amount of damage that has been done to these structures. I mean, whatever happened on this planet was huge. I mean, it shifted everything east to west. Everything got shifted from east to west. So that's a huge earth shifting. And so now resources are scarce. Well, we all know what happens when resources are scarce. People are going to start fighting over it. Well, these material children had never really fought before, but some of them have. And also, some of them have already perished, and you have got demigod children running these cities. So now they're half human, half god. And so you've got a mixed bag going on at about this time. And so huge wars broke out. Nuclear bombs were set off, all kinds of crazy shit. And so I think it was like, well, maybe not 5,000, maybe close to 10,000 years later, that is when Adam and Eve showed up.
Yeah.
Which was, so basically Adam and Eve couldn't show up until these fuckers had pretty much destroyed themselves. And for the most part, they had pretty much destroyed themselves by the time Adam and Eve showed up. The only thing that was kicking around on the planet were the entities that we can't see. Most of the material children that had bodies are dead. The ones that didn't have bodies, they will soon be dead because there's no tree of life to sustain them. Caligastia is still alive at this time. Satan is trapped on this planet at that time, and he ain't liking it much because he's used to traveling around the system, and to be stuck in one place did not bode well for his personality, and he became quite violent, and thus we get his stories. And let's see what else was going on at that time. Just lots of fighting, and then that all began to peter out after about 8,000 years, and then a couple of thousand years later, Adam and Eve show up, and by this time, Van and his human companion had made their way back to the Mediterranean, and by this time, the humans were pretty much settled. The demigods were mostly dead. The only ones that were still alive were actually in the east, in India. They were still alive, but but all the ones in Egypt, gone. They're dead, or just barely alive, and but mostly gone. And their demigods' children were ruling in Egypt at this time.
So yeah, Van made the way back, and then that's in the Urantia book. It says that he knew that Adam and Eve were about to arrive, and he had the first Garden of Eden built.
Yes.
On, I think, a peninsula in the Mediterranean.
And he recruited a lot of humans for that task, like almost 1 million.
Yeah.
And they were excited, and of course, you know, these legends and rumors had survived all of this time about Adam and Eve coming, and also through the material children, but they talked about Adam and Eve, but not as ones sent by Michael, but as ones sent by Lucifer. So they had a plan too, okay? But Lucifer never got around to his plan because Jerusalem was never, because he couldn't settle in Jerusalem, and they didn't really know that on Urantia because the communication lines were cut off. There was only basically the only ones that could communicate off planet at that time, I think, were the Melchizedeks. They were the only ones. And they were not sharing their frequencies. They were like, nope, these are ours. And so there was actually no communication for them to know what was going on Jerusalem. And so they believed that Lucifer was going to send material daughters and a material son to uplift these humans. And so they continued on that teaching the whole time. And Van used it to his advantage to build Eden. And the followers of Lucifer, they also built an Eden, by the way. So it was just a different type of Eden. And it was further in the east. So Van built his on the shores of the Mediterranean. Almost like 1 million humans helped build this place. And now, this I got to stop there and I got to back up for a second, okay? Because I got carried away with the story. Now, resources were tight even before the catastrophe, because the material children, yeah, they were making bodies for themselves, and the process was going along pretty good, but they were also developing ways to like get these bodies to last longer for themselves, because they didn't like changing bodies. Okay, they didn't like it. It was an uncomfortable process for them.
Sure.
And so, so much so that they started developing elixirs using human blood.
Yeah, so this is where we're going with the horror story part of our
Yes.
show.
So this is where we get into the horror stories. And the thing was about harvesting the blood of the humans is that it wasn't about just harvesting the blood and drinking it. No, there was a process. Now, at first, they tried to work around this process. This is where we get into a bit of the story about Inky and Lilith, Inky was trying to use alchemeric processes because he was like one of the original material sons that came to the planet, and he liked humans, and he wanted to make sure that they're being helpful, but his more desperate brothers and sisters were just like harvesting the blood from humans whatever way they could in order to sustain themselves. And this was also in the early days before they started building their technology. And so they did make plans to build these facilities so that they could keep switching out bodies. But in the meantime, they discovered that they could use blood, human blood, to sustain themselves. And that's what they did. And but they needed a certain type of human. And so there was 2 projects that were worked on. One was building the facilities to create new bodies, and the other was to create an elixir that some kind of synthetic elixir that didn't require them to use humans as sacrifices. And that was mostly unsuccessful. In the end, what they discovered is that they basically had to scare the shit out of the humans to create an adrenaline rush, which would change the chemistry of the blood, and then they would have to harvest it at a precise moment in time in order to get the full effects and from precise points of the human body. So there was huge studies into that in which to make the best harvest. And so they were doing this, and they were doing it on a regular basis, and it was actually starting to get out of control, so much so that the humans began to rebel. So they weren't liking it anymore, and so that became, and so there was a rebellion, and that's when the material children of that time figured out that, yeah, we might be stronger than the humans, and we live longer than them, and we're smarter than they are, but my God, when these fuckers get together and they get really pissed off, be afraid.
Yeah.
Be very, very afraid. I mean, it's like having 1,000 ferrets attack you all at once. Yeah, you could throw off 2 or 3 of them and just be like, yeah, whatever. But you get 1,000 of them jumping on you, yeah, you're going down.
You're
and
done.
yeah,
You're done.
and you know they're going to kill you.
You're getting
with,
chewed to pieces.
oh yeah, you're getting killed with 1,000 nibbles, I should say, by 1,000 nibbles.
Yes.
And yeah, so that's basically what they found out, and so they became very afraid of humans, and they didn't look at humans as being children, children anymore that needed education. they looked at children as something to be, as the human children as
as-
something to be feared. And once that started taking root, then they changed tactics. So what they ended up doing is it became a good thing to be a sacrifice for the gods, is what they ended up doing. So they flipped the narrative.
Change the narrative. Yeah.
Yes, they flipped
Yeah.
the narrative. Sounds familiar again, doesn't it? So they flipped the narrative, and created a new religion that would have humans volunteering their blood, volunteering to be sacrificed, and they built cults up all around this, and and they made it seem like it was so special that you can't be part of our group unless you've been sanctioned by the gods. Well, the gods only had one thing in mind, or the gods. They had only one thing in mind at that time, these demigods, and that was they wanted the best humans. They wanted humans that would produce the best adrenochrome, and so when they started picking and choosing who was going to be their priests and stuff like that, they taught their priests, what to look for in humans, what traits they were looking for to allow, and then they could come to the temple and get training. Most of their training was just brainwashing about sacrifices and how wonderful it is. Like, you'll be sacrificed to, I don't know, pick your god, and you will spend eternity in paradise. So they built that up, and then ignorant humans, they wanted to offer themselves as a sacrifice to their demigod, to their kings, and actually their demigods were their kings at that time, and so they wanted this to happen. So temples sprung up everywhere, and so they went a long time doing this, and it really came in handy after the first catastrophe. But and what they were looking for is they wanted humans that from certain colored races. The orange man was one of them, the green man, and the red man. These were their favorite races to use for these sacrifices. Yeah, you wonder why we don't have red and orange and green anymore? And the only reason the red man was spared is because he made it to North America. Ever wonder why there's no red men in fucking anywhere else in the world except in North America? Because they were actually the best for harvesting, for the adrenochrome that they wanted. The red man, they very best. Bring a red man into any one of these cities, it's like immediate sacrifice. They went out and attacked villages for the red race all the time. Like, wipe them off of that part of the planet completely. Not one person from the red race is left anywheres in the Middle East, and nowheres in India, and nowheres in China. Completely wiped off the planet. You can see the remnants of the red man in some of the northern indigenous tribes in Asia Minor, but no pure red race is left there at all. So yeah, you wonder why?
So they harvested these various colors for this substance to prolong their lives.
Yes, for different purposes. So they completely wiped out the orange race, and completely wiped out the green race. Which the green race wasn't that hard to wipe out. They were mostly pacifists. Yeah. Well, they were the green race. They had one trait that all the other races didn't seem to have, and that is they were always born beautiful. Always born beautiful. The green race, there was never any defects in the green race. They were just always born perfect. And so they got wiped out very quickly. And then the orange race took a little bit. They didn't use the orange race much until they had to. They mainly stuck with the green and the red race. But when it came right down to it, they ended up harvesting from the orange race as well. But that almost proved their demise, because the red race, they're bigger. They were bigger. They were like broad shoulders. They were strong as fuck, and they were smart. And so when they trying to harvest from the orange race, like they would fight back, and they had the ability to fight back good. And they were basically Stone Age, but they knew how to make rope, and they knew how to carve things. And so think Ewoks against the Empire. That was the red race. Like you came into the territory of the red race, or not the red race, the orange race. You were probably not going to leave there alive. You were going to be in trouble. Same thing with the blue race. And they were like it took the blue race to keep the orange race under control, because the blue race was just slightly more vicious and slightly more clever than the orange race. But the orange race were mostly brutes, and so they didn't have the finesse that the blue race had. And so anyways, they ended up in the end. They ended up wiping out these two colored races, and all of of one race in one part of the world. And this went on for like 100,000 years at least. And by the time the catastrophe came, they had pretty much changed the face of the planet. And basically that catastrophe was a bit of a reset. And the harvesting, they had so many ways, and they had all the stuff written down. They had libraries of their research. Everything was written down, details on how to set up the machines, to draw the adrenochrome that they wanted. And everything was laid out just like step by step by step. And so that went on for a long, long time. Then after the catastrophe, they still they pulled themselves together, and their methods of harvesting the blood that they needed became much more primitive. Like, basically bashing heads on a rock is what it ended up coming down to, because they had lost all their beautiful technology, and they had also forgotten how to build it, because most of the people that built it were long fucking gone.
Right.
Because no tree of life, and some of them just gave up. They got tired of switching bodies. It was just hell for them. So it was just easier just to give up and allow death to come, and it comes slow for them. So it really slow, and so I mean they would spend like centuries dying once they made the decision to die, and so that was always rough, and some of those old followers were around even after the catastrophe, but they were a little bit insane, mostly forgotten mostly forgotten Jerusalem. They just wanted to stay in their mountain cave and die. And that's what they did. But that's not what the younger ones wanted to do. They wanted to live. And so they started rebuilding. And some of them went east, where the catastrophe wasn't so bad. And they began rebuilding. Now, at about this time, Adam and Eve showed up. And we'll be quick about this one. So Adam and Eve, being sent by Michael, their job was to add a divine plasma to our DNA, essentially.
Yeah, I think as I understand what it's talked about, they were supposed to reproduce among themselves, and I think later their offspring or whatever, they would build up a certain amount, like 300,000 or 500,000 of this line, and then send them out into the world to blend with humans and create these hybrids that had a higher DNA, let's say.
Yeah, more strands in their DNA. So basically, everything was going in reverse. That's basically how the universe does it itself. Just think, Fibonacci spiral. And so Adam and Eve were like 16, 18 feet tall. The humans on the planet at that time were 4 or 5 feet tall. You're just little fuckers. Adam and Eve cannot breed with those humans. That would just be a really, really bad idea. That's like having, a great big, that's pit bull massive breeding with a poodle. The poor poodle's going to die. So, it's not something that's done. So, but with each generation from Adam and Eve, they would get smaller. So, first generation, so if Adam and Eve started out at 18 feet, generation after them would be 16 feet. Generation after them would be 12 feet. Generation after them would be 8 feet. Generation after them would be 6 feet. Generation after them would be 3 to 4 feet. Okay? Or 4 feet. So now you go down 10 generations. Now you have Adamites that are the same size as humans. That is when the breeding was the crossbreeding was supposed to begin. Is once you got down to those sizes. Then those the 4-foot Adamite and the 4-foot human, they would breed. Their children would be a little bit bigger. Okay? And then, then their children would breed, and then their children would be a little bit bigger. And then their children would breed, and then their children would be a little bit bigger, until finally we got to the 18, 20-foot height range. And then, then there would be direct breeding between the children of Adam and Eve and the children of time and space.
Okay, yeah.
Then there would be direct breeding once we reached that 16-foot height. And then once that happened, then the supermen that were part of Calagassia's staff, which included Van, okay, then they would come into the picture and they would start breeding with this group of humans that are the offspring between the 16-foot Adamite and the 16-foot human. And then that would have created Supermen on this planet. But that was going to take about 50 or 60,000 years for that to take place.
Yeah, and so what happened with Adam and Eve, I think, is they came from. It was like they went somewhere that didn't have cable.
Yeah.
Something like that. They were where they were trained. They were trained in all these, high technology, and they had access to all of the.
They had access to the internet. They had access.
Things.
Yeah, they had access to the internet.
And then they went here, basically, or like rural Africa or some, the equivalent of some place that was so different. And then they were expected to carry out this mission, and I'm not sure how long they like 100 or 200 years into the plan, they defaulted. Basically, they said we can't do this anymore.
Yeah, they didn't even make it to 300 years. Right. No, they didn't even make it to 5. Yeah, because they ended up defaulting because they had expected things to be. Well, actually, I think what ended up happening mainly to them is they lost track of real time.
Okay.
I think that's what happened to them, is that Eve lost track of real time. I think Adam was being diligent at tracking real time by watching the stars, but Eve lost track of real time, and so the short period of time that they were here felt like 10,000 years to her. And so from her perspective, things should have been moving a lot faster. Because the thing is Adam and Eve did not venture out from the garden that often.
Right.
Like they were like basically, they had their inner sanctum.
They were in and this garden was many miles long, but you're in the same you're in the same island for 100 years. It doesn't matter how big the island is, unless it's like Australia or something. But
Yeah.
you stay on New Zealand for 100 years, you're gonna want to go somewhere else.
Yeah. So when she did venture out from the garden, only 300 years had passed, but even though intellectually she knew that it was 300 years, inside it felt much, much longer to her. And so she wanted things to go move along faster. And she got the bright idea to breed with the Nodites. Now, the thing is that the Nodites, they were the descendants from Nod, who was one of the supermen with Caligacia's staff. And he was already a big fucker. And he bred with the humans and had offspring. And some of them survived. And some of them came out fairly normal. And so those were the ones that he didn't kill. So, because he wanted to leave children behind, so they developed techniques to where they could breed with the humans, even the humans being that small, and so the Nodites, which were fairly large humans, because they had this, because they were a mixed race, and so Eve reasoned within herself, well, they're almost our height, almost our size, why can't we just breed with them? But that wasn't what the plan was. And that is where she ended up defaulting, is because she was trying to take a shortcut, because I think she probably secretly wanted to get the fuck off this planet.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know why she did, but the thing that hangs me up is why it was, and I think I know why it was such a big problem for them to do that, because there weren't enough for the DNA or the whatever it was to they had to have the right amount of a certain line before they, I don't know, it's like baking a cake or doing a chemical formula. You have to mix these two, then make this and compound this, and
they
so
didn't
on,
have critical. They didn't have critical mass.
Yes, that's
what it was, which is basically. And thing is that it's what it's what the material sons and daughters ran into when they thought they could shortcut teaching the humans. They gave us all the technology on a silver platter, but
we didn't have the background to understand.
Exactly.
So
we ended up just either we ended up destroying it or misusing it, and which gave them ideas to misuse it later, of course, and it wouldn't stick. With every generation, they had to retrain. Every fucking generation, they had to retrain. Whereas the universe's plan, million-year plan to bring the children of time and space into light and life, you were building on lessons learned. And they were being built in the morphogenic field. One lesson on top of the other, and so on and so forth, so that as the generations progressed, you might have to teach them the newer concepts, but the older concepts are already in the morphogenic field.
it's why our kids can do things with a computer that we'd never dream of.
Exactly, and it's what they ran into when typing, when the first typewriter was first invented. It was not intuitive at all for people to use. Like, they really, they really struggled to really do it, and and the struggle was so much so that Russia actually reinvented the typewriter, and,
The Dvorak keyboard, yeah.
yeah, they did their own
different
keyboard.
arrangement.
Yeah, which actually, if you grew up with a Russian keyboard, you probably find it more comfortable to use.
Yes. There's three configurations of keyboard that I know. The very first ones they had, it was the alphabet basically in 3 rows. The QWERTY keyboard, which is what almost all computers have, and then you can buy different variations. Then there's the Dvorak, which is the one, I think the Russian one that you're talking about, the different arrangement, and there's 1 or 2 other different arrangements that are available.
But now, to like, what took years for people to master, now takes like 1 semester
Yep.
in school, and people have mastered the typewriter because it is well ingrained in our morphogenic field.
Yeah, that was
how
the
it works.
dimension I think that the Lucifer didn't understand. He somehow, and it's funny because I'm trying to figure out why he went wrong, even whatever. But and certain other, I guess, mortals on the planet don't seem to understand this other dimensions. I see it a lot with certain, the hardline atheists and stuff. They're like complete materialism. There's nothing outside of what we can detect with science or anything like that. There's, and they're almost afraid when I'm mentioning. I get like willful ignorance. Okay, that's one thing. Like I used to be when Christians would talk about God and Jesus and stuff, I was like, I felt a little uncomfortable at some of those things, even though I knew, I've always been sort of spiritual, but as I understand more and more, I kind of have reconciled it all. So, and I can't really blame them because it's how they are for whatever reason, but it's not registering on them. And I think some of these the early humans obviously didn't have the
Interesting.
something just
that,
fell down from above the door, I guess, like a little hailstone.
That
or
light
marble.
got really bright and popped some of its insulating material on the
Krow and I.
base. Wow, that's
All right,
fucked
I'll
up.
have to check it out after the show.
Yeah.
So, so it's again this exponential growth. You invest a penny at 1% interest, you're going to get $1 billion, but it'll take a long damn time.
Yeah, and that's basically
That's what's happening. But at the very end of it, you'll get you
It
get nothing for the first 150 years, and then you get 1,000, a million, you get your billion in the last 1% of the time period.
Yeah, exactly, and that's
then
how,
before that, it's nothing.
Yeah,
It doesn't look like it's doing anything.
that's how our evolution path was supposed to go.
Yeah.
Like there was no time, there was no real schedule when it came to evolving the different physical and material things on this planet. There was no time schedule.
Okay.
The material handlers, life
The
carriers.
life carriers, yeah.
Yeah, the life carriers, they have no schedule.
Once they dropped off the biochemical soup or whatever it was that was to begin evolving, however long it took for that to evolve into animals and plants and humans and things like that, that took as long as it took. Once you had humans of sufficient advancement to receive thought adjusters, that was when
That's when the schedule began.
yes.
But the schedule for us didn't begin when we got thought adjusters. When the first 2 humans got thought adjusters, it was still 500,000 years later before Caligassia and his planetary staff showed up. And the reason for that is because there were no colored races on the planet at that time.
Right.
It was just one human race called the Andadites. And they had free reign over this planet for 500,000 years. They actually became quite the good builders with stone. They got really good with working with stone, but they couldn't cut it or shape it or anything like that. They could make rudimentary concrete from ash, and that's what they did. and whatever they could scrape off the surface of the planet. They were not big diggers or anything like that, and they spent a lot of time fighting with each other too, but there were great strides spiritually even during that time, because the thought adjusters were present on the planet. But it's once the colored races showed up, that's when the planetary prince and his staff showed up, because they had to wait for the colored races, and there's a reason for that as well. The universe likes taking things apart and then watching everything come back together in a new and different way. And that's basically what was going to happen on our planet. We were to separate into our colored races, which each had their own traits, strengths, and weaknesses. What would have happened is that those weaknesses would have been bred out, and then we would have been left with the strengths, and then all of those strengths would have been breeded back into one type of human,
Right.
and then we would go forward as one race again, and with many lessons learned. That didn't happen for us. So, anyways, so Adam and Eve come, and even though they only had a short period of time here, about maybe 1,000 years, and they were still able to spread their plasma through much of the human race.
Yeah, it makes the case that even though they quote failed or defaulted or whatever it was, that the mission did not go the way it was supposed to, but there was substantial benefit to us nonetheless.
Yes, quite
the
a
message
bit.
I got.
They did manage to get all the way around the world. The Adamites did. They did even make it to South America and North America. They did make it there. It's just that North America, or the Americas, didn't get as much of the plasma uplift as other parts of the world. And so, I mean, I've always wondered why people in India and Northern Africa, why they're not as susceptible to a lot of the diseases that we are, and the First Nations people here in North America, they are way more susceptible to more diseases than we are. So it's like, why is that? Well, the Adamic uplifting would have provided the immunity against most diseases on this planet, and so we wouldn't be dealing with a lot of what we're dealing with. And so that was one of the things that we didn't quite get enough. And so, anyways, there was enough spreading of the Adamites. Now, I'll tell you, this is where we get into another part of our horror story, if you will. I'll tell you what parts the Adamites didn't get to, and that will tie in later to why things are the way that they are. The Adamites didn't make it into Central and South Africa. Okay? Central and South Africa was largely untouched by the Adamites. A lot of the isolated tribes in the north were untouched. Up through Tibet and up through Siberia, that whole area. Australia wasn't touched that much by the Adamites. A couple did make it to the shores of Australia, but that was a few couples, but that was it. Very minimal uplift. Almost no uplift in the central and northern parts of North America, and also in South America, like really South America. But Central America and the western coast of America, they got some uplifting because of how the Adamites landed on those shores. Phoenicians they were, and so that actually began to dictate where the British Empire traveled and those associated with the British Empire, like the Dutch Empire and the Vatican and who else? The Dutch, the Norwegian. No, not so much the Norwegians. There's other countries in there, so they so that this then what it, and so the Adamites began to spread across the planet. Now there weren't that many material children left. There was a lot of their children left, and still ruling cities, little kingdoms like demigods. Now, they did not notice this at first, but when they did notice it, well, they didn't notice it. They did begin to notice it about maybe 20 maybe 15,000 years ago. And that's when they tried to stop the Adamites from spreading. And there was a huge campaign. And the Adamites ended up scattering. That's how they ended up going north a lot. And that's how Norway and all those countries ended up getting the Adamic uplift. Because they had to spread. And they had to bail because now the demigods, these kings, all of these kings were after them. And the reason why they were after them is because they figured out that anybody that was descended from the Adamic line, whether all they needed was one parent to be an Adamite, just one parent, and they discovered that they could not use the adrenochrome from those humans. That became a problem, a huge problem, because now they didn't have access to a huge stock. That stock was dwindling very quickly, especially in the Middle East, because all the people basically wanted to breed with the Adamites. Even kings wanted to. Like if you showed up in a kingdom and you were an Adamite, you got treated like royalty. Like you were invited to the king's house, like before they figured out that, Adamites were no good for harvesting. But they were held in a high standard, and they wanted them to teach their people. They wanted to learn, and so this is how different kingdoms ended up advancing as well. But the Adamites were careful not to overteach, and plus Adam and Eve didn't overteach their children. They only taught their children enough, so that when they went out into the world, they would not overteach. And so they were welcomed everywhere. And then the second catastrophe happened. We know this as the Younger Dryas period in science, in geology. This was a meteorite that hit in northern Greenland, and it sent ice and snow hurtling through the atmosphere everywhere. You can see the evidence of it in down the eastern part of United States. There's like these pockmarks all in the earth, like bombs have been dropped from the sky, except there's no evidence of the bomb. And plus they're weird. And it's like it was hit with soft rock, ice, which blasted apart and turned to steam and completely disappeared, and all you would be left with is pocks in the earth. And and also there's like trenches, like water troughs connecting all these pockets. Well, that would come because the ice balls melted after they shattered when they hit the earth.
And on a semi-related note, if you look at a map of North America, like the Great Slave Lake and going down Hudson Bay or something, what the suggestion that Hudson Bay is an impact crater, and then the Great Slate. There's all these lakes at a specific distance from Hudson Bay, and we can talk about that another time. But we need to continue with this. But yeah, so it just reminded me of
and probably a similar event did happen, and that sent ice balls right down as far as the Middle East. Now it wasn't as devastating to the Earth as the first catastrophe, but it was devastating enough that it forced northern tribes south, and forced a lot of the tribes to rethink their survival, and so there was a lot of moving and shifting around, and it basically destroyed civilization again, and plus the influx from the north really upset a lot of things, because when these tribes came down from the north, they were much stronger and much hardier than their southern cousins, because they lived in the north, and plus they were way more organized coming from the north, because if you are not organized in the north, you're dead. You're dead. I mean, every survivalist, like you watch Wilderness Alaska, those survivalists that live in the woods year round, they will tell you straight up, if you don't have a plan, then plan to be dead.
Yeah, you do one thing wrong,
Yeah.
you're done.
Yes. I mean, all you have to do is just slip into the river and just get one leg soaking wet. Chances of you having that leg at the end of the day, if, pretty slim. Because, I mean, it's going to be frostbite and you're cutting it off if you want to save your life. It's either that or get yourself a handful of maggots and take care of the gangrene real quick. Anyways, sugar will do the same thing. And
Sugar?
Sugar.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people don't know sugar is an antibiotic. They used it.
Yeah.
They've used it. Honey, all of that.
Yeah. Okay.
So, if the shit hits the fan, you find yourself in a survivalist situation, honey and sugar. If you got a bad cut, honey or sugar, one or the other. And anyways, that upset society, everything again. And so more things were forgotten. I mean, there were kings about 8,000 years ago that would brag that they know the languages from before the deluge, which was 12,000 years ago, because all that ice and snow, when it melted, did turn into a flood. And, there was a bit of a flood, but not the whole earth, but enough to, disturb the Middle East.
Enough to make long-lasting stories, for sure.
Yes, for sure. And so that whole thing got upset again, and again they had mostly forgotten a lot of stuff, but there were still pockets of evil fuckers that were still doing sacrifices, still drinking blood, but about 1,000 to 500 years before Michael showed up, all of these people were dead. They were gone. The last Adamite died about 200 years before Michael showed up. And they pretty much expected that. That is, they had already known that is what was going to happen to the Adamites anyways. But if things had gone along the way that they would have, the 50,000 years would have been more than enough for the Adamites to spread all across the world. So, the Adamites, they actually did a countdown for when they were going to be done, when their mission was done. And these stories come out because they were still around, even when the Roman Empire was around, before Michael showed up. And there are stories about these people and their abilities and what they could do, and these were Adamites.
Okay, so we're coming up on 1:45. Do you want to end up part one here? And I guess I'm just going to ask a little question to was the this group, the first group that was doing, you know, the sacrifices and stuff was, and then I think you said that when Michael completed his bestowal 2,000 years ago, he took them all away, right? So those are all the ones that were, the first wave of them were destroyed, and there were some other stuff that happened later on, which we're going to talk about
Part
in the next
two is
segment.
going to start
Yeah.
with Pentecost,
Mhm.
and
Okay.
then we'll move forward from there.
Absolutely.
And so uh, so blood sacrifices were pretty much regulated to animals because humans got gotten to a point where they weren't comfortable killing other humans on a rock, mainly because they had the Adamic uplift, and so that uplifted them spiritually as well.
Okay.
And so they moved mainly to animal sacrifices, and they held on to that for the longest time. But basically, the animal sacrifices that they were doing, the rituals for how they did it with humans was almost the same thing. It's pretty horrific when you think about it. But that was the kind of shit that they were that was being done before the deluge, and then. When it was discovered that Adamites could not be sacrificed for substances to sustain the demigods, then they wanted them gone. But then the deluge interrupted that campaign, and then that campaign was largely forgotten after society started reorganizing itself, because they had better things to think about than blood sacrifices. Although some of but the animal sacrificing stuff sort of held on in there in different cults, and it perpetuated its right up until the day of Pentecost, and yeah, and next time we'll start with Pentecost, and then we'll move on to John D. and what took place on that night that he opened the gate into the bowels of hell, I guess, for lack of a better description, and how that event is still affecting us today.
Yeah.
And that is where the real horror story begins. Because now you find out I'll explain to you why the slave trade evolved the way that it did, why genocides have happened, and why it has only happened to certain ethnic groups and not to others, and what really happened in North America with the First Nations people. I'll give you a little hint. It wasn't all disease and alcohol that wiped them out. Yeah, there's vampires among us.
Okay, and we're going to end it there.
Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Done. Okay, it's done. Camera's off. This camera's off. Stand by.